Sung Jinwoo went from the world's weakest hunter to literally leading an unstoppable army of darkness that could flatten the entire world. His 10 million shadow army is packed with absolute monsters, but not all of them are on the same level. Some are pure muscle, others are tactical geniuses, and a few are just straight up nightmares. Today I'll be breaking down the 18 most overpowered shadows in Jinwoo's army in chronological order, including their powers and what truly sets them apart from the rest. Starting off with the weakest shadows, the Shadow Knights. These foot soldiers were the first to join Jinwoo's shadow army. They're completely covered in heavy armor, and their armor was strong, as Jinwoo initially struggled to cut through them. Similar to hunters, Shadow Knights are divided into different classes, each with their unique abilities. Fighter-type knights specialize in close-range combat, while assassins are incredibly fast and can use stealth to make themselves completely invisible. Rangers specialize in archery magic and long-range combat. However, the most powerful among these knights are definitely the mages. With their powerful magical abilities, these shadow mages gave Jinwoo the hardest time in the job change quest dungeon. Their magical spells include Blaze, a devastating fire-based attack, and Detection, which allows them to pinpoint hidden enemies, even those using cloaking techniques like stealth. But their most dangerous ability is Summoning Magic, which allows them to summon an unlimited number of knights to overwhelm their enemies. While Shadow Knights may not be as strong as the higher-ranked shadows, their true power lies in their sheer numbers. Individually, they are about as strong as C-rank hunters, but together they can take down a B-rank hunter easily. Moving on to the drippiest shadow, Igris. With his crimson armor and regal presence, he might look like a Walmart version of the first shadow monarch, Ashborn, but don't be fooled, as his strength is anything but second-rate. Even Jinwoo admitted that if Igris had fought at full power during their first encounter, he would have been easily killed. Igris was originally one of Ashborn's most trusted warriors and was tasked with testing the future Shadow Monarch when the time was right. After Jinwoo defeated him and used Shadow Extraction, he shortened his long-winded name to simply Igris and welcomed him into his army. Though he started as Jinwoo's strongest shadow, he was eventually surpassed by Tusk and later Beru. However, after Jinwoo fully embraced his role as Ashborn's successor, Igris unlocked his true potential, jumping from elite knight to martial grade, becoming one of the deadliest shadows in the entire army. As a marshal, Igris is an absolute menace on the battlefield. He's an unmatched swordsman and a master of hand-to-hand combat. In fact, he is so good in battle that he was able to hold off the Frost Monarch all by himself for quite some time. But his strength isn't the only thing that sets him apart. He is also super intelligent, as he's not just a warrior but a tutor, helping train both Jinwoo and his fellow shadows in battle tactics. With his ruler's touch ability, Igris can control objects without even touching them, further proving why he was once known as one of the two wings of Ashborn's army. Next up are the Shadow Ice Bears, towering beasts who fought against Jinwoo during the Red Gate incident. Unlike the somewhat disciplined Shadow Knights or the spellcasting mages, Ice Bears rely purely on raw power. They're probably my least favorite in Jinwoo's army because they have no flashy skills, just brute strength, except for the Alpha Ice Bear, Tank. As a Knight grade shadow, Tank is as powerful as an A-rank hunter. His physical power is no joke, as seen when he effortlessly tore through a horde of demons. And unlike the smaller Ice Bears, Tank isn't just a mindless beast. He was intelligent enough to team up with Iron to take down one of Kargalgan's generals. Before we continue, do me a quick favor, guys, so hit that subscribe button if you enjoy our content. It would mean the world to me. Next up is my favorite shadow and the GOAT himself, Iron. Iron is the shadow of Chul, the crazy A-rank hunter who was killed by Jinwoo during his fight with Baruka. After his death, Jinwoo extracted his shadow and named him Iron. Iron serves as a bit of comic relief, often going overboard in battle and causing excessive destruction with his antics. But don't let that fool you. After being promoted from Knight grade to Elite Knight grade, Iron became as powerful as an S-rank hunter. Though Jinwoo sees Iron as a dunce, he still keeps him around as he always gets the job done in battle, like when he was able to kill a giant with a single strike to its head. These giants are extremely powerful, and we will talk more about them later in this video. Iron even inherited a special ability used by tanker-type hunters thanks to Chul being a tanker. The skill is called Shout of Provocation, which magically taunts his enemies to attack him without thinking. Although it doesn't always work against those stronger than him, which really pisses him off. Moving on to the Shadow Orcs, who were once a race of red-skinned warriors that first appeared in the Hunter's Guild dungeon. Each of these high orcs was strong enough to contend with an A-rank hunter, and some were even intelligent enough to communicate with humans. And they only grew stronger after Jinwoo turned them into shadows. The Shadow Orcs were so reliable that Jinwoo entrusted a few of them with guarding Gina using shadow infiltration, an ability that allows shadows to hide within the shadows of others. An interesting fact about orcs is that their tattoos symbolize their victories in battle. The number of tattoos they have indicate just how many enemies they have killed. While the regular high orcs are really powerful, they pale in comparison to their leader, Kargalgan, who was also killed and turned into a shadow by Jinwoo. So let's talk about the shadow of Kargalgan, Tusk. As the boss of a top-tier A-rank dungeon, Tusk was already as strong as an average S-rank hunter even before becoming a shadow. Despite his intimidating exterior, Tusk is actually quiet and has a somewhat shy personality. While most of Jinwoo's other shadows rely on physical strength and close-range combat, Tusk's specialty lies in casting powerful magic spells that come in handy in battles where large-scale destruction is required. With his gravitation magic, Tusk can levitate his enemies and slam them into the ground. However, it's his wide range of hymns that truly make him an overpowered shadow. Hymn of the Fire Dragon unleashes a massive fire beam from his mouth, while Hymn of Agony curses a target with intense pain. Hymn of Protection creates a shield around himself or a target, and Hymn of Strengthening boosts both his power and that of his allies. Hymn of Frenzy weakens his target's defense, increasing the damage they take. Tusk has many other hymns, each with unique effects that can turn the tide of battle in different ways. This combination of offense, defense, and support spells makes Tusk one of the most versatile shadows in Jinwoo's army. Next on the list is Kaisel, the shadow of Kaisellin, a giant wyvern used as the battle mount by the monarch of White Flames, Baran. Baran himself was extremely powerful, and using Kaisellin as a mount made it even more annoying for Jinwoo to fight him. However, thankfully, Tusk launched a fire attack in the air, causing the wyvern to come crashing down and forcing Baran to fight on the ground. After defeating Baran, Jinwoo extracted Kaisellin's shadow and named him Kaisel, as he didn't recall its original name. Despite its intimidating presence, Kaisel isn't exactly useful for combat. That's why the wyvern became Jinwoo's Uber driver, summoned whenever a situation demanded speed and mobility, especially when Jinwoo couldn't use Shadow Exchange. Moving on to the Ant Queen, the boss of the Jeju Island S-rank gate. The Ant Queen took control of Jeju Island 4 years before the events of the main storyline after the Korean S-rank hunters failed to eliminate her. The Korean government attempted to reclaim the island 3 times over the next 3 years, but failed each time. During the 4th Jeju Island raid, the Ant Queen fought fiercely and was able to hold her own against a full strike squad of S-rank hunters for quite some time, thanks to her immense physical strength and ability to shoot a potent poison from her mouth. However, the Korean hunters eventually overpowered her, with hae-in delivering the final blow and decapitating the Ant Queen with her sword. Jinwoo later extracted the Ant Queen's shadow, expecting a powerful addition to his army, but to his surprise, the shadow was far weaker than he expected. This was because the Ant Queen's strength didn't lie in combat, but in reproduction. As the queen of her colony, she gave birth to thousands of ants over 4 years, with each generation more advanced than the last. However, her reproductive power became useless in shadow form as she no longer had a physical body to reproduce. She even started controlling the ants that Jinwoo turned into shadows. And by the way, each of these regular ants is strong enough to give A-rank hunters a run for their money. Seeing that the Ant Queen was no good for battle and his control over the shadow ants becoming weaker, Jinwoo ultimately decided to terminate her shadow extraction. Next is one of Jinwoo's strongest shadows, Beru, the shadow of the Ant King. When the colony eventually began to run out of food, the Ant Queen gave birth to the Ant King to lead the colony and wipe out anyone who stood in their way. Sound familiar? Due to having been born to kill, Beru revels in his power and has an obvious bloodlust for battle. He was deadly even before becoming a shadow, single-handedly killing most of the Japanese S-rank hunters for lunch, including the strongest hunter in Japan, Goto Ryuji, and had Jinwoo Jinwoo not interfered, the Korean S-rank hunters would have been dinner. Even after Jinwoo turned him into a shadow, Beru remained extremely brutal toward his opponents and rarely held back unless ordered to. His speed is no joke either. He can strike before his opponents can react and cover vast distances in minutes thanks to his wings. And as expected from a martial grade shadow, Beru has great intelligence and is able to communicate and talk to others. And of course, as one of Jinwoo's strongest shadows, Beru has some crazy abilities. His gluttony ability allows him to absorb the skills and knowledge of those he devours, as shown when he gained healing magic after eating byung-gyu. He was able to heal himself after his sparring match with Jinwoo and even healed Yoonho back to full strength from the brink of death after being beaten by Hwang Dong-soo. Beru can also manipulate his size, making himself bigger or smaller depending on the situation. He can also spit an extremely concentrated poison from his mouth that can kill his targets within seconds. With harsh orders, he can temporarily enhance an individual's stats by 50% at the cost of their sanity. Despite his terrifying presence and powers, Beru has a surprising hobby. He loves watching Korean period dramas, which led him to develop an amusingly historical way of speaking. And I can't blame the guy. I'm also a big fan of Korean period dramas. Unfortunately for Beru, Jinwoo eventually found out about his hobby through shadow preservation and scolded him for it. Next is the shadow of the best healer in the series, byung-gyu. As an S-rank hunter, byung-gyu was a master of healing magic and could instantly heal anyone even from severe injuries. During the 4th Jeju Island raid, he restored Baek and Dongwook to perfect health right after the Ant Queen poisoned them. He also regenerated Dongwook's arms after the Ant King tore them off. On top of his healing powers, byung-gyu could use buff magic to boost his allies' abilities with his spellbook. But byung-gyu wasn't just about healing and supporting. He also had the combat abilities of an A-rank hunter. He had a special skill called disguise, which allowed him to blend in with his surroundings and become invisible. However, he was unable to move whenever he had this skill active, making him an easy target if his enemy was somehow able to track his position. Unfortunately, that's exactly what happened when the Ant King was able to detect him and brutally kill him. Shortly after, Jinwoo turned byung-gyu into a shadow to heal hae-in, who was on the brink of death due to her severe injuries. Jinwoo himself tried using healing potions to heal her future wife, but nothing worked because her wounds were just too bad. Byung-gyu's shadow was able to heal hae-in and save her life effortlessly, which showed why he was the best when it came to healing. Later, Baek asked Jinwoo to allow byung-gyu's soul rest, which he ultimately did and terminated the shadow extraction. Moving on to humanity's greatest calamity, Kamish. Kamish was a dragon that originally served Antares, the monarch of destruction, and was also the boss of the first ever S-rank gate. One of his overpowered abilities was Dragon's Fear, which allowed him to unleash a mana-infused roar from his soul that could completely paralyze his opponents and drive them into a state of intense despair and panic. And as expected from a dragon, he could shoot fire blasts from his mouth, powerful enough to turn entire battlefields to ash. This monster was responsible for single-handedly destroying the American West Coast and massacring hundreds of S-rank hunters who were sent to defeat him. His rampage only ended after the last 5 surviving S-rank hunters banded together and finally managed to kill him. 8 years later, Jinwoo stood before this fallen titan and successfully turned it into a shadow, though it took 2 tries due to how long the dragon had been dead. Unfortunately, we never got to see Kamish's full potential, as his body began to crumble away shortly after becoming a shadow. Because of how much time had passed since his death, his shadow form couldn't hold, and Jinwoo lost what could have been one of his strongest shadows. While Kamish's loss was definitely a major one for Jinwoo at the time, he wouldn't miss him for very long. But we'll talk more about that later in this video. Next on our list is Jima. Jima might be the shadow that we know least about. What we do know is that his rank as a shadow is elite knight grade, meaning he's about as strong as an S-rank hunter. We also know he was strong enough to take down a giant with 1 hit, so yeah, he's pretty strong. Jima wields a pair of large black tridents and can use them with great skill, and much like Beru, he can manipulate his size to make himself bigger using mana. Even before becoming a shadow, Jima was strong enough to contend with A-rank hunters and had scales thick enough to serve as natural armor. Next are the Shadow Giants, shadows of the massive beasts from the Tokyo S-rank gate, each as big as a large building. Even before becoming shadow soldiers, every one of these giants was as strong as an S-rank hunter, and with 28 of these monsters rampaging during the dungeon break in Tokyo, they weren't just a threat to Japan, they were on their way to wiping out the entire world. When this S-rank gate suddenly appeared in Tokyo, the Japanese government reached out to hunters around the world for help. Among these hunters was Yuri Orlov, a Russian S-rank hunter specialized in barrier magic. Yuri managed to make an enormous barrier that completely sealed off the gate. However, when the dungeon break finally happened, one of the giants shattered Yuri's barrier with a single strike and then proceeded to eat the poor guy like he was a burrito. That same giant then wiped out over 100 of Jinwoo's shadow soldiers in one hit. Besides having great strength, giants are also surprisingly fast and agile for their size, as they were able to easily overcome the S-rank hunters they encountered. So it's safe to say after Jinwoo killed these giants and extracted their shadows, they became the strongest infantry soldiers in his entire army. Next is Greed, the shadow of Hwang Dong-soo, an American-Korean S-rank hunter. Hwang is probably one of the stupidest and most overconfident characters in the entire series. The guy just had a talent for messing with people who were clearly way stronger than him. After his brother was killed in a raid where Jinwoo and Yoonho were the only survivors, Hwang believed that they were responsible and sought revenge. So when Jinwoo and Yoonho visited the United States, Hwang kidnapped Yoonho and brought him to an abandoned factory, brutally torturing him in an attempt to force him to admit that Jinwoo killed his brother. However, thanks to his shadow soldiers, Jinwoo was able to find Hwang and use shadow exchange to teleport to his location. Despite being clearly outmatched, Hwang refused to back down and tried to kill Jinwoo. However, Jinwoo brutally killed Hwang and extracted his shadow, which he named Greed, a fitting name if you ask me. Since Hwang was an S-rank hunter, Greed was already at general grade when he became a shadow. Unfortunately, despite being one of Jinwoo's stronger shadows, we don't know much about Greed's abilities because we didn't get to see much of him in action. The most we saw was his strength when he managed to break out of the Frost Monarch's ice prison simply by flexing his arms. He was also smart enough to communicate and talk to others. And now let's talk about Bellion, the strongest shadow in existence and the first one ever created by Ashborn. Shortly after Jinwoo defeated the three monarchs, Raken, Silad, and Croatia, Bellion arrived in the human world with the rest of Ashborn's original shadow army. As soon as they landed on Earth, Bellion introduced himself as the Grand Marshal of the original shadow army and declared that now Ashborn's entire army belonged to Jinwoo, including himself. Much like Igris, Bellion is a master swordsman and can even transform his massive sword into a whip, which is especially useful in long-range combat. Thanks to his enormous wings, Bellion can fly at high speeds and is an expert in aerial combat as well. The moment Bellion joined Jinwoo's army, Beru wasted no time to challenge him for the position of Grand Marshal. However, it was completely a one-sided match, with Bellion effortlessly swatting aside Beru's attacks and slamming him into the ground with his powerful whip. We also saw Bellion's power in action during the battle against the Titans, where he killed their leader with a single hit, and in the fight against the Monarchs, Bellion teamed up with Beru and Thomas Andre, and the trio were able to easily defeat the Steel Monarch, Tarnak. Bellion wasn't the only shadow passed down from Ashborn to Jinwoo, as Ashborn's army also included two other types of shadow soldiers. The first type were these shadows that resemble Bellion with their wings and appear to be weaker versions of him. Unfortunately, we don't know much about these shadows or how strong they actually are. However, the second type of Ashborn's army were the three shadow dragons, the same race as Kamish. Much like Kamish, each of these dragons is said to have the power to destroy the entire world, and by the later parts of the series, Jinwoo will have all three of them under his command.